they're worried. I mean, they've heard all the bad stories. So there's two things. They've heard all the bad stories. They think it's a terrible place to live. And they also think it's completely unaffordable. So they're the two things as well. So
We've got some fresh new young talent doing some things that I know you haven't heard before.
1, 2, 3, listen.
Welcome to Finances, your home for all things financial, investment, money and lifestyle. Hosted and curated by the very talented team of certified financial planners, Burke Britton Financial Partners. So this is the Finances podcast, episode number 114. I'm Jay Burke and I'm joined by one of my usual co-hosts, Delta Smith. Delta, welcome.
Thanks, Jay.
And today's guest is Louise Beattie, Director and Co-founder at Aged Care Steps. Aged Care Steps providing advisors like Delta and myself, technical resources, tools and support to better advise our clients on aged care. Louise, it's fantastic to have you on the podcast.
Jay and Delta, I think it's a very topical time for me to be here as well. So I'm excited.
It's funny, when I was thinking about this podcast and the last couple of days, I think if I had to sort of priority order the inquiries that we get at the moment on financial planning topics, aged care is right at the top of the pops. It is, and I think one of the reasons for that is that it's so impactful across every one of our clients, every demographic, whether it be those people retirement planning, whether those people moving into aged care, whether it be family members around them. So I think this will be a very well listened to episode, and looking forward to it, Louise. Now, just before we started recording, we mentioned that there's been some pretty you've had a busy week, I suppose, with a few changes that have cropped up. Before we get to that, let's start with a brief background on yourself and also Aged Care Steps. Tell us a little bit about Aged Care Steps, how it was founded, and I suppose we'll get to it, but why there is such a need for your services and support.
I think the population demographics themselves tell why it's important, because we have got an aging population. We're living longer, but that's bringing challenges with frailty. It's bringing challenges for people of how they stay independent, how they stay in their homes, but where and how they access that support as well. And for the kids who, I guess, in previous generations were there to support their parents, we're often busy, mum, we're living somewhere else, we've got all these other challenges. The needs and demands are just so much greater on all of us. So I saw this years ago, and I guess from my first start, I've always worked, my whole career has been in the financial services industry, helping and analysing legislation, understanding right across the board of tax and super and social security. And I've always really liked it. It's like building puzzles and jigsaws, but sometimes I must say reading bits of legislation is quite a challenging, hair-raising job as well. But I've always really liked that legislation and trying to make common sense of what is a lot of jargon. And I think when I very, very first started, so I've worked with financial planners all my life, but when I first started, it was a consumer organisation I worked for. And that was where I really loved trying to make the legislation so simple that somebody who had no experience was looking at their retirement and their age pension, how could they understand it? And so I think I just sort of fell into this area a little bit by chance, by design. And the aged care was where I saw quite a few years ago, there were a lot of great experts in superannuation and in tax, but everybody avoided social security and aged care. So I went, why not me? I know this, I know I can do it, I can see the need. So a friend and I set up another business previous, but we set up Aged Care Steps in 2012, moved a little bit away from some of the other areas where we thought there's so many people competent, and just focused on how we deal with aged care, and not just the rules or the strategies on how to minimize fees, but also just how families can come together and create informed decisions that work best for them. And we chose to do that more by supporting guys like you, Jay and Delta, so that, there's a much a lot more people who are able to help, rather than just the few of us.
One of the things that's I think really interesting. Sorry, Delta, I cut you off there, but one
Okay.
of the things that I find like really interesting that you as having 10 years ago or more, 20 years ago, you had this picture of what was happening with the aging population. One of the interesting things you notice with individuals is that they don't have that sort of global view of an aging population. Sometimes don't realize what they need until it's upon them. And I think that has been a bit of an awakening for a lot of people with an aging population. And I think some of the statistics that I've heard and that we're seeing now in reality with some of our inquiries are staggering. I'm sure we'll get to some of the statistics, but some of the statistics on the amount of people moving into aged care are just phenomenal. So I think bringing awareness to this topic, and not only technical awareness and understanding, but sort of planting the seed for people at whatever age in their retirement phase they are to start consider it, I think is super important. Delta, I cut you off.
No. So I just wanted to touch on a point that you made there, Louise, that was just in relation to even understanding the fact that there's an interaction between social security and aged care, and that in fact they are different and assessed differently. So, that there are just so many parts, and it's so impactful to have people like you in our corner that are breaking down complex legislation and trying to have terms that are relatable for families, when ultimately they're all making emotional decisions at that point in time, aren't they? We're trying to give them that clarity.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, and we love it as well, because what we find, I guess another reason why I love the aged care is because it is such pure financial planning. It's not about selling product. It's not about all those other things where sometimes financial planning gets a bad name. It's about purely strategy, listening to clients, finding a need that helps them, helping them understand it. And what we love is, I think, is the planners that we get to work with are ones who really are passionate in this area and want to help clients and gets great joy from seeing the complexity you can remove from families and what anxiety that removes as well. Because, so many of us, as some of your audience will be going through this for themselves, but so many of us are going through this with parents. And I know I myself, I still have both of my parents alive and in their 80s. My husband has both of his parents alive and in their 90s or close to their 90s. I still have 13 aunts and uncles still alive. The funeral directors don't make much money from our family. Not yet anyway. And so, it's something that as a family, we are really very conscious of and worried about as well. And when you're in the middle of it, even things that seem logical, I know myself, I know the rules, I know how it works, but when you're in the middle of it and you've got all those emotional family things and different views of siblings and old sibling rivalries or perceptions come out, it makes it so much harder without a purely objective person in the room, which is the financial planner or the other professional who's helping you articulate what's most important and what you're thinking and why. Sometimes that realigns things as well for you.
Louise, obviously there's the great potential for complexity in this area, but maybe before we talk about some of the new legislative updates, maybe if just I first touch on it may be a softball question, but for those people out there sort of trying to define what aged care actually is. I know sometimes it could be considered a bit of a nebulous term or one that people don't quite know what it means. So from your perspective, when we talk aged care, what is aged care and what is aged care planning? What does it encompass?
That's a great question, Jay. And I think it's really, really important because most people, when they hear aged care, they think nursing home. And then it's an immediate, not for me, not happening ever. But aged care really is much broader than that. It sits alongside our health system, but it is separate to that. So in its essence, when we're talking about aged care, what it's doing is acknowledging as we get older, we need to think about what our capacity is going to be, either from a physical capacity and mental capacity. So we're thinking about that, how that, because that will slow, even for the most active and healthy of us, that those two things are going to slow. That does mean that we can still access an independent, active, productive, quality life, or whatever it is we choose to do. But we might need some help and we might need some support. So in the essence, aged care is thinking about being aware of the potential for decline. It's about thinking about where I'm going to live. Is that my home with the kids in a retirement community, or do I need to move somewhere that's fully supported? So the where you live is really important, but then the practical and the realistic view of how will I live? So visualizing, for everyone who says, I'm staying in my home, this is where I am, you've got to think about how are you going to do that on a day-to-day basis? How do you get to and from your appointments? How do you get out of bed? How do you do your groceries? How do you prepare meals? Those sorts of things to go, is it realistic? Is your home environment set up to facilitate that? Do you have support networks around you to build that support? Do you need to bring in external services? Do you need to move? And so your aged care planning is thinking about all of those aspects and then making sure you've had the conversations with the people that you think is going to be the supports or be there to articulate why and how and understand how it will work for the entire family. With all those challenges we talked about that everybody has in their lives.
That's a great summation of aged care. It's great because that simple articulation of what it is, I think, is that primary piece that sits sort of in advance of then the technical component, which is when people actually seek advice. Let's backtrack a little bit, or fast forward a little bit to the recent changes. So let's talk about that before we cover off on some of the stages of sort of retirement. What have been the big changes that happened? I know people are wanting to know about it. We'll get this podcast out nice and quick so people understand what those changes are and what the implications for them are. I'm sure we could spend 4 hours on a podcast talking about these, but the highlight reel of those changes.
Days. Yeah, look, before we rush, before we go into that, I think we probably should put into perspective, these changes have been coming for a long time. We've known about that there's needs for change, there's need for reforms for years. We had the last major change was back in 2014 when they completely rewrote the Aged Care Act, and that significantly changed the fee structure for anybody accessing home care or residential care. Since then, we've had endless numbers of reports and reviews, culminating in the Royal Commission into aged care, which didn't paint a great picture, but Royal Commissions often don't. Sometimes they're a little bit biased in the view they get. They just get the people who had the bad experiences, not the hundreds of thousands of people that had amazing experiences. But it did signify two things that are really happening in aged care. The demand is growing. The complex needs of people moving into aged care are increasing. So they've got much greater need for nursing support and more intensive day-to-day activities and things as well. And that the aged care sector itself was really struggling financially to meet the demand, to meet the expectations, to deliver really high quality with the revenue that they were getting, which is so locked down and regulated. So a lot of people needing more care, a lot greater levels of care, not enough funding into the system. We were heading for a disaster there. So there's been a number of things that successive governments have done over the last few years to try to set up the system better, regulate it better, control what's happening, have a better structure. And the last missing piece in that was what everybody is wanting to know, how much is it going to cost me? And that's the last bit about really trying to make sure that the providers are getting enough money, but limiting, to make sure they're not just setting their own prices. It's still very regulated in that regard. Make sure they've got enough money to stay in business, because if they don't stay in business, we've got a really big problem, because we won't access the care we want. And then what? So these changes, as I said, I think they took us out by surprise. We were expecting government and the coalition to drag their feet for a lot longer. And all of a sudden they got together. So the legislation's coming into Parliament has got bipartisan support. We honestly didn't think they were going to get there. We thought it would be an after the election thing, but they've got it into there. They have, but it was also a lot more extensive than we were thinking that they were going to do. It's very much in line, though, with the aged care task force that was in December that put together a report, and that had some great minds in that who understood the aged care system from all different viewpoints. The changes are very much in line with their recommendations and report. So we sort of knew what the government wanted to do. We just didn't think they would do it now or this extensive. So here we are with it, trying to sort through with what might change from 1 July 2025. And there's still an awful lot of detail to unravel. It's a huge bill. It was like something like 600 pages of legislation that we're wading our way through. Not all of that's about the finances, but it's all interconnected. So I've been having, a lot of sleepless nights. Might have also ruined my holiday that was coming up as well. But anyway, so there's a lot of detail still to come, because the legislation only ever gives you part of the story. It's in the rules and regulations and the practical implications. So there's a lot to learn about it as well. But in essence, what it's about is getting more funding into the aged care sector. It's also about, this is a very heavily subsidised sector by the government. I know everybody who accesses care is really upset by how much they have to pay. But let's put in perspective, the government, we as taxpayers, pay most of the cost.
I was actually looking at your keynote. I didn't attend your keynote. Delta did at Self-Managed Super Fund Association, but I was looking at some of the statistics you had there that like current government expenditure exceeds $33 billion currently, if I've got that right. Which is circa 1% of GDP, and the projections on that, what it will cost over the course of the next 40 years is astronomical. Like we're talking, that doubling or more.
Yeah, it is. And with the bubble of, we've got the baby boom population, which is a big bubble of older retirees about to get into this age group. And so it's just demand, and they're living longer. And let's face it, higher expectations than the previous generations, which is all great, but we need to have a system that's sustainable. So the new changes that are being proposed, so I'm going to keep saying they are only being proposed, but we do expect they will pretty much come through. The government is not moving away from their responsibility to fund a significant part. At the moment, if we look at home care, 95% of the revenue that aged care providers get to provide home care, 95% of that comes from government taxpayers. 5% comes from the person who's getting the benefit of those services. Now, a little bit that's going to shift. The government's projections are the new rules will shift that from being, instead of consumers paying 5%, they're going to pay about 11%. So it's just a 6% shift. 89% of the funding is still funded by the taxpayer. In residential care, that proportion will shift from 76% of government funding down to 73%. So still only small swings, but we do know that for individuals, their share does look significant. So I'm happy let's have a look at what they are, if you like.
Yeah.
And we should break it down to home care and residential care. And when we look at residential care, we've got the accommodation costs and the daily fees. So where do you want to start?
Louise, could I just ask at that point, could we just talk about the basics of what home care is versus what residential aged care is, just in case we've got listeners that have family members that they're looking to support and they're just overwhelmed and wondering where maybe they need to start?
Yeah. So home care is a system where somebody and when we talk about home care, they might be still living in their own home, the home they've always lived in. They may have moved to a smaller home. They may be living with the kids. They may be living in a retirement community. So any type of home arrangement that you have across the country can still, if you've got a person over the age of 65 and they need help on a day-to-day basis, they can look at the home care system that the government subsidises. Now, that's going to provide what most people have been accessing support is they might just be finding it harder to get to the supermarket and cook their meals. So they're looking for delivered meals and meal preparation services. They might be having more and more problems getting out of bed on their own or showering on their own. So there may be support with those things. So bathing, dressing, getting from your house to your doctor's appointments or to other commitments that you've got. So those transport services, gardening, cleaning, help with cleaning the gutters, small maintenance around the house, and sometimes also modifications to your home that you might need to change the bathroom a little bit and put rails in, or you might need to put ramps at your front door to get wheelchairs in. So those sorts of things. So all of those sorts of services, which are things that we were doing on our own, or things that we now need help with because of a health issue, that we can get external support in to take the burden off our husband or wife or our children or other people as well. So that's what a lot of it's about, is taking the burden off the rest of your family for things that you're not quite capable of doing as well. And sometimes I have this argument with my mother all the time. So the only bit of home care I've managed to get my mother to take is cleaning once a fortnight. And she will argue with me to say, I can do the cleaning. And I said, there's absolutely no question, no doubt. Yes, you can. But she also cares for my father who has dementia. She has an extraordinary amount of things that she needs to cope with on a day-to-day basis. And I said, this is just one thing we can take off your plate and get somebody else to help you with, which also might help keep her safer, because so many accidents occur in the house for people who are vacuuming or dusting or stretching. And, so I said, it can just take away some of the risk and some of that pressure so that you can do all the other things that you need to do. So I think a lot of people need to really factor. It's not you can't, but does it make sense to help keep you safe and independent in your own homes?
Louise, on that point, and again, this might be I think I know the answer is anecdotally, but from your perspective, is the reluctance, you find people's reluctance to engage with services pride, or the perceived costs that they maybe have a warped perception on what the costs would be comparatively out of their pocket versus the support they get? I think yeah.
Absolutely both, and I see that in my mother as well. I'd add in there, because I'm hoping she's never going to listen to this podcast. I'm hoping we could also add in there a bit of stubbornness as well.
Yes.
So it's absolutely pride. I've done this all my life. I've never taken handouts. I've never had support. I can do it. There's also a bit of a fear that the minute she says, I need help, that her bossy daughter's going to come in and all of a sudden take control, do things, make all the decisions, and she'll find she's somewhere she doesn't want to be. So I think there's the fear of what opening that door is going to lead to. And there's most definitely the financial side, because they hear all sorts of stories. People talk down at the club, they raise things, and there's this alarmist view of just how much it's really going to cost. And my argument is always, can you afford not to have this? Let's just work out. It's about rearranging finances to create cash flow, and what's the consequences of not getting this support. And they're often more diabolical than just spending some of the money you saved for. And I often say with people as well, we spend all our life saving money for retirement, and we're saving for the rainy day. And when it gets to the need where your body or your mind is starting to have some frailty emerge, that's the day it's pouring rain. So getting your money out and spending it when it's pouring is a really good thing.
Louise, just so we can sort of round off the discussion around home care packages, this is a little bit of a loaded question, but if we can overcome those hurdles in accessing some support, how long might we expect to wait to actually be able to provide a provider that could come in and support us at home?
Yeah, we've got two challenges with home care. So at the moment, we've had some really horrific long waiting periods. Most people don't go and apply for a home care package until crisis has hit and we needed it like yesterday. There's a bit of a process, because if you want to access the government subsidies, then you need to first of all go to My Aged Care, get approval. Then you need to wait for an assessor to come and do an assessment for you. So we could have several weeks just in that process to get the assessment. Once you've got an assessment done and they say, yes, here's what you're approved for. At the moment, there's one of 4 levels of packages, and that's going to go to 10 different levels to try to meet the needs better of people. Then the wait starts, because tick of approval to say, yes, you qualify, but there's only a certain number of packages and a certain amount of money to go around. And so your name gets added to a waiting list. You need to wait for funding to become available. And that's been waits of, in the past, was up to 2 years. It's got down to about 9 months, then it's gone back to about 15 months. So we're seeing those lengthening. So that means you may be waiting a year or more to get the money to help subsidise the cost. You could go and buy it privately. So for those people who do have their own resources, don't just sit there waiting. Think about, will it make a real difference to your life? You could just go and pay for it privately while you're waiting for government funding to come through as well. The government recognises, it's not good enough. So some of the changes around moving packages from 4 to 10 levels, changing some of the rules around the funding will let the money that's available cover more people as well as bring more money in. Their aim is, but they're giving themselves a 2-year time frame to get it down to that, is a 3-month, no more than a 3-month waiting. But 3 months is still a long time too. So we do have that. The other issue, so you could be waiting a year or more, so don't muck around, get it, start the process quickly. But also too, once you've even got the package allocated, the other challenge is finding a provider who's got capacity where you live, because we just do not have enough workers. The providers are really struggling to meet the demand. And so even though you may have tick of approval, the government package allocated to you, so the money's available, you may then not be able to find somebody to provide those services to you. So there's lots of challenges that it will take a while to sort through.
And that's eye-opening or staggering for, probably most families that are listening, thinking that, residential aged care is the first step. No, there are many, many more steps prior, and don't wait. I think, I've listened to some of your other information, Louise, and we always encourage it, that proactive nature. What can we be doing now to plan for, those upcoming needs that we are going to have? So key message, don't leave it to the last minute.
Just simple things which might be thinking about. I know we all want to stay living in our homes, they're big emotional attachments, but is it really the right place to live? Particularly if we're going to have all these issues, should we be starting to make the move to more of a retirement community or a smaller, more easily accessible home without all the stairs? Starting to declutter the home. That's one of the big issues. And it's a safety issue, and it's a dusting issue and a cleaning issue with all the things we accumulate over a lifetime. Starting to think about, how do I declutter? How do I start sorting through? And bless my mum, that's what she's been doing for the last 4 years, is really sorting through that, because it's amazing how much we can accumulate. Starting to think about who's around, who's there to support you, looking at what's in your community, becoming, actively thinking about where I can get support, and working with financial planner to go, now how do I fund the gaps when I'm waiting, or when what I'm being allocated is just not enough for me too.
I love the way you think, Louise, around the practicalities of what someone has to do day to day in conjunction with the complexity and technical advice that they require. I think if the support and advice people receive is missing one of those, I think it really has the potential to miss the mark. I mean, as advisors, if we're clinical in our nature and don't understand those practicalities of people, the emotional component of people and the transition in their lives, I think it's certainly a missed opportunity, something that I know Delta and I and the team at Burke Britton are certainly passionate about. Now, we railroaded you, Louise. We took you off on a little bit of a tangent there. And this is the great thing about the podcast, and also talking to someone like yourself. We could talk about lots and lots of different topics, but I think we're about to jump into some of the changes. So let's rewind there and see how we go.
All right. So do you want to start with the home care?
Perfect.
If given this where we speak, if we look at the home care at the moment, once you've gone through all those hurdles, you've got the approval, you've got a package there, and what we should also explain what a package is about is there's 4 different levels. Those packages are all a budget level. It's not here's the services you're going to get. It's this is the amount of money you've got to spend towards your care needs, and then you get to choose what services you want and need up to the dollar value in your package. If that doesn't go far enough, then you might need to start to fund a little bit extra, or you might need to start to then tap into who's in my network of friends and family to help me. At the moment, the highest package, I think, is up to around about $68,000 worth of funding, which may seem like a lot of money, but you probably are going to lose 20-30% of that in administration fees. And then the rest, once you look at it on an hourly rate, and that is really only going to provide you with about 2, maybe 3 hours a day of care services. So somebody who's very, very high level needs, you can see that is still going to mean there's a bit of services that are paid and subsidised very heavily by government, but we're still going to need other resources in there. Now, once you've got your different package level, there's a set fee. Everybody pays, it depends on which package level you've got. But, and I'm going to round figures just because it's a lot easier than the specifics, but everybody is supposed to pay around $13. There's a base fee of about $13 a day for every day of the year for your package. Although, interestingly, very few people pay that because most of the aged care providers as a marketing tool, so we won't charge that. It's not a compulsory. It does mean, though, you've got less money in your package. So, but a lot of them don't do that. Then there's a daily fee, which is an income-tested fee only. So how much extra you contribute, which is up to about $15,000 a year for the wealthier and people, is subject to income testing. So again, as I said, not a lot of people. I think I was listening to a webinar the day from the government. They're saying there is only, of all the people who get a home care package, only about 14% of them are paying any fees at all for the home care package. Everybody else is fully subsidised. Now, the new system that they're proposing to bring into play will change, because instead of having 4 packages, we'll have 10 packages. Just means a greater way of allocating the money across to people. They're simplifying the means testing a little bit. They're moving away from, there won't be a set daily fee that's payable. What they'll do is you'll still have a budget allocated to you. And then you work with the aged care provider to have your services. Every time after they deliver, they have to deliver the services to you. Then they add up how much it is, and at the end of the month, we expect they'll do this monthly, they look at the services that you've received and say, here's how much was spent for you. This is how much you need to pay. So after the services are delivered, you'll be charged for ones you chose. Now, will be the services are also being categorized. I know it's really complicated, so I'm trying to keep it as simple as I can. But what they'll do is the services that you choose will be grouped into three things. So first of all is any services that are clinical care. So that's nursing care, the allied health things like physiotherapy and those sorts of services. If you use your package to pay for those services in your home, you won't have to contribute anything. So the provider will deliver them. They'll say, here's how much we spent on those services this month, and that will all come out of your package. You won't need to contribute anything. If you are if you then look at the next level of services, which is things that are allowed to help with independence. So that's services which you choose to use your money to help you have a shower, get dressed, your transport going to and from meetings and appointments and those sorts of activities. And those will be what they call independence levels. There will be a percentage that you'll need to pay of the cost. So whatever, if it costs you, say, $100 for those, you will pay somewhere between 5%. I'm just trying to think of the numbers that they had. It's 5% and 50% of the cost will be paid by the by you, depending on where you are. So if you're a full age pensioner, you'll only pay 5% of the cost. So if it costs $100, you'll put in $5, government will put in $95. If you're a part pensioner or you have the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card, you'll pay somewhere between 5 and 50% of that cost, depending on where you are in that scale, and that will be means tested just using the Centrelink age pension means testing. So whatever they calculate for your age pension will just go across to work out, is your contribution $5, $10, or out to $50 for those services. If you're a self-funded retiree, you'll pay half the cost. So you'll pay 50%. So if you use $100 of your budget to pay for transport services, $50 are paid by the government, $50 is paid by you. Then you have the last category, which is probably the most popular category of everyday living expenses. So they're the things that you need help with: cleaning or meal delivery, gardening, maintenance around the home. Again, the same thing, that every time the provider provides a service, they work out what the costs of that was, and they would tell you the schedule of all those costs right up front. Then full pensioners will pay 17.5% of the cost. Self-funded retirees pay 80% of that cost. Part pensioners and Commonwealth Seniors Health Card holders pay somewhere in between the 17.5% and the 80%. So very complex system, but what it's really looking at is if you've got a budget, you work out what services you want. Depending on what services you choose, then you will be given, there's a dollar amount comes out of your package, and you might need to contribute a portion of it as well. Being your health needs no contribution, and then as you get down to the expenses that we all pay for every day, the contributions are higher. The other thing, though, noting is that to make sure it stays affordable, we have got what they call a lifetime cap. So the amount you contribute towards those expenses of, the independence and the everyday living, one, it's means tested how much you're putting in, and then there is an absolute overall cap of $130,000 right across your life cycle. So people who are wealthier or who have care needs over quite a substantial number of years at least know there's this finite amount that they would have to contribute, which helps with your planning over time as well. And obviously that threshold will be indexed as well.
Would you forecast more people will be needing care for longer and reaching those lifetime caps, given the ageing population, but the extended life expectancy?
Possibly. If people started, let me caveat, if people started to access care needs when they really needed to, I would say yes, we probably would get towards those thresholds. But noting that, the caps are probably, if you're a pensioner, you're never going to pay that much. Even if you're a part pensioner, you probably will never get to those limits as well. It really is our self-funded retirees who've got lots greater capacity to fund it, that they are the ones that are probably looking at those numbers. But I think because people delay accessing home care, again, they possibly, not many people get to those limits. At the moment, I should say, we have a cap already. It's about $80,000, so it's a lot lower. Very, very few people even now get to that $80,000 cap under the current rules, let alone get to the $130,000 under the new rules. Mind you, though, the current system is income tested, where the new system will be asset and income tested. And there is probably greater contribution fees for some people as well.
It's complex.
It is. It's why people need you guys to be sorting. Well, you need our team to be working it out to help you, Jay and Chelsea, you two be able to interpret it so that the clients don't have to know all the rules. They just have to, because it's much easier when you can look at your own individual situation. It's really hard when we're doing this whole broad general, here's how the whole system works for everybody. So it's easier when you can get your own specific details and numbers. And unfortunately, we're rebuilding all our calculators to be able to do that as well now.
So that was the home care packages, Louise. What was next?
Okay. The next thing then is saying, well, what if it's not home care? Because remember, home care could be in your home, could be in your kid's home, could be in a retirement village or land lease community, those things. When your needs become too much to live completely out in the community and you really are needing full-time supported care, or the costs are high and we want to try to get better economies of scale by grouping in with other people who need those, that's where residential care comes into play. So residential care is about combining where you live and all of your care needs into one package. Now, broadly, we've got two things that we need to fund in residential care. First thing, because what I often say to people is, you think about if you're moving to residential care, what you're really doing is you're moving to a new home. Something's changed, and we do this all our lives, something changes in your personal situation. You move jobs, your family grows, your kids leave home, you want a different lifestyle, something changes. We said, the house I'm living in doesn't suit me anymore. I need to find a new house. Aged care is exactly the same when we're looking at the residential. My physical, my mental capacity has changed my life. My current home's just not suitable anymore. I need to move to somewhere that gives me a safe environment and all of the support I need 24/7, 365 days a year. So that's what residential care is all about in the absolute essence there. So the first thing, anytime we move house, what do we need to do? We need to either buy or rent that house. So aged care is exactly the same. We're not going to have a title deed that says we own this place. What you've got is a contract. So we're either going to have to buy the right to live there, or we're effectively going to pay a daily fee for that right. So I often say to people, think about it like buying or renting the room.
I love this context, Louise, this perspective. Because the tendency when people are talking about moving into aged care, we start throwing around terms like RADs and DAPs and just mind blown. Like what the hell does that actually mean? When you said exactly as you point, you're changing your home, your location, and you will need to do what you've done previously, which is either decide financially, work out whether or not it's best for you to buy or rent. That analogy, it's not really an analogy, it's exactly what they're doing. But that perspective, I think, is invaluable for a lot of people out there that are just absolutely bamboozled by the concept of aged care funding. So, I've heard you say that a couple of times on a couple of podcasts and keynotes, and I think it's worth repeating because it's just a brilliant perspective shift for anyone thinking about moving into aged care. Yeah.
what it can also do is as you're right, that makes it much easier if we talk about all the rules and just the jargon and the concept, too many things to memorize.
Yeah.
So if we talk about, well, okay, we're moving homes, you buy the room, you rent the room. We already understand that. Now it's just what are the fundamentals of it as well. Now, people get really scared when we talk about let's talk about the costs of the rooms. They get really scared when they see those numbers because the cost of the room is anywhere up to a bit over $3 million. You might pay 300,000, you might pay 500,000, you might pay 1.2 million, you could pay anywhere up to 3 million. And people go, they're huge numbers. And they go, why such variation? Again, remember, we're just buying a new home. If you want to buy a home in Australia, there's a lovely apartment in Sydney, which I would absolutely kill to live in, but it's something like $168 million. So there's no chance I can afford to even rent it, let alone buy it. But we have this diversity of property prices because of location, quality of build, access to amenities, size, all of those things that affect how much does your house cost, affect how much does it cost for a room, because somebody's had to buy land, put a building, provide facilities, all of those things as well. On average, I think the average is about probably pushing close to the 500,000. But it does depend on your location because supply and demand is very much a factor in this as well. So that system will still apply. The aged care provider gets to choose how much they want to charge the room based on what they need to have provided it, because often they've had to borrow money to build and things like that as well. So they can choose that. Current rules, if they want to charge over $550,000, they do need to go to the government and put forward a business case, get approval and say, this is why we think our room is worth more than that. Now that's a number, excuse me, that was a number that was set back in 2012. In that last 13 years or so, property prices have increased significantly. Building costs have just astronomically through the roof. So that number needs to increase. So from 1 January 2025, that number will go from 550,000 up to 750. Doesn't mean all the room prices are going to jump by $200,000. It just means providers will have a little bit of an easier pathway. If they need to charge more than 550, they'll be able to go up to at least 750 before they have to go and get a business case done. Because it's still possible for them to charge more than that. A lot of them charge less than that. But we may see some prices shift. We may start to see a little bit of an increase there as well. Now, for people who are paying, again, a lot of us, when we move from one house to another house, we choose to say, well, I don't need that house anymore. I'll sell it to buy my new house. So again, we have that same thing in residential care, that people might choose to sell their home to find that lump sum, the refundable accommodation deposit, the RAD, to buy the room in aged care. What again I often say is it's like if it costs you $500,000 to move into a room, it's not lost money. That wasn't $500,000 less you have in your wealth or for your estate to pass on to your kids. That's just $500,000 you still have sitting in a different location. It's now sitting in the RAD, which is a refundable accommodation deposit. So the money, if you pay $500,000 for your room, when you leave or you pass away, that $500,000 comes back in full under the current rules. So that comes back in full. Unless, of course, sometimes we find people might choose the other ongoing fees that they've got to have that deducted from that money instead of out of their bank account. Then you're obviously spending some of it, so that reduces how much is refundable. One of the changes, so it's refundable. There's also absolutely no risk because it's government guaranteed. That provider, something really bad happens and they go into liquidation, your money's safe. And the other thing a lot of people really like is it's asset test exempt for Centrelink. It is still the one strategy we've got. We can have a whole lot of money that's just, apart from your own home, exempt for Centrelink and help you get a better age pension. So, it doesn't earn you interest while it sits there, but it might help you get a better age pension and it gives you somewhere safe to live. So there's two big values in that as well. So you choose what the price, you choose where you want to live. They tell you what the price is, and then you decide, do you want to hand over that much money to buy the right to live there? Or do you say, I won't do that, I'll pay you the rent instead? And that's at an 8.38% interest rate. So that can be quite high to do that. Big change that will happen. So anybody who is moving into aged care before 1 July 2025, those rules are still intact. Pay a lump sum, fully refundable, or choose to turn that into a daily fee, which again is a little bit like having an interest-only loan to the provider. If you say to the provider, I'll take this room, I agree to the $500,000, but I won't give you that money now. What I'll do is I'll just pay you the daily fee. It's like you owe them $500,000. You look at what's the current interest rate. It's a fixed rate for you currently. Well, from 1 October, it's going up to 8.38%. So you're paying interest at the 8.38% on what you owe them, that $500,000. Okay. If you go into aged care before 1 July 2025, those rules are still going to stay. But if you move into residential care after that date, there will be a retention amount deducted from that money you pay. So if you pay that lump sum, the provider is going to be able to take out each year 2%, and they get to keep that. And that's just about giving them a bit of extra money to help fund and maintain and invest in their building, because half the aged care providers are making a loss on their property portfolios. It's not really sustainable. We wouldn't put our money into property if we kept losing money every year. So nor would aged care providers. So we need to make that sustainable. So every year, whatever your lump sum is that you pay them, they'll be able to take 2% of that, but only for the first 5 years. So it just means, if you gave them $500,000, you're going to get at least $450,000 of that back. You're only going to potentially lose up to 10%, depending on how long you stayed there. If you're only there for a year, you lose 2%, and so on. The rent is going to change. The rent side will also change as well, whereas now it's a fixed amount just based on those pricing. That will change, and it's going to index over time, the same as rents do in any investment property. Go in and say, what's my rent today? And then it increases over time. So that will happen as well. So the cost of accommodation, there will be a bit more of an impost there for people. So again, making really good financial decisions to go, what are all my resources I've got? And how do I use those resources to fund where I need to live now? And looking at, does that mean keeping my home and renting it? Or does it mean selling my home or whatever else we might need to do? It's important. But that's the biggest fundamental change with the accommodation costs, the fact that prices may start to increase a bit, and you may not get you may lose up to 10% of what you pay as a lump sum, and the rents are going to be indexing ones over time if that's the option that you choose.
It reminds me a little bit about a lot about the conversation on early preparation, even in the sort of home care packages. One of the thing that we continue to encourage all of our clients is it's a lot of the numbers around affordability and costing and options. They're things that can be done well and truly in advance. Like you've got the opportunity to actually understand these numbers well and truly before we've got to make a decision. I heard one of the podcasts that you've done, maybe it was a couple of years ago, Louise, talking about, family members, at the hospital, in the cafe, making financial decisions for mum and dad, which, you're really setting yourself up for, error, failure, or something to go awry by not doing that positive and early preparation. So again, I know that we've probably laboured that point. Delta and I and the team will continue to labour that point, and hopefully everyone listening to this podcast takes that on board. But I think it cannot be emphasised enough, the importance of actually understanding the costs and the implications, because there are many, and the complexities of this environment lend itself to people making bad choices, bad decisions that unfortunately then come back to burn them later on.
Yeah. We do talk a lot about the the decisions made in hospital cafeterias and car parks, and they're not good decisions because you're not thinking rationally when that crisis hits. You're not thinking rationally, and you also do not have time to investigate all the options as well. That's why we've got to do it beforehand. And we talk a lot, you've probably heard listening to some of my sessions, we talk a lot about the decisions that are made by families when the crisis hits are driven by 3 Gs of aged care. We talk about it. So we trademarked that phrase. We thought it was really good. Grief, guilt, and greed. And they're all natural human emotions. Some are good, some are bad, but they all surface. All 3 of them surface when families are getting together to make decisions for a parent, and particularly when it's in a rushed, heightened anxiety frame as well, which is why talking to planners, thinking ahead at all stages of your retirement, what's important to me, what are my options, what do they know is important to me. I've had these conversations with my parents as well. They're not easy conversations, though, let me tell you.
They're definitely not. Now, I've got a few rapid fire questions for you, Louise. They don't need to be rapid fire answers. You can answer them however you like. But before we get there, was there anything else in the legislative changes that you wanted to touch on before we jump onto those?
I think we really should just have a very quick look at the everyday living expenses in residential care as well. And I can do that really quickly for you.
Yeah, let's do it.
We talked about that. You've got the cost of the room. Then you've got to go, okay, now I've got all the other expenses, who's paying for food, who's paying for electricity, who's paying for all the staff that are there day to day to help you out as well. At the moment, residents, everybody pays just under $64 a day. And then if they've got financial capacity, they could be contributing, say, another $35,000 a year. So everybody pays somewhere between about $25,000, and I'm really rough guessing on this, somewhere between about $25,000 and about $55,000, $60,000 a year for all of those services that you get. Under the new rules, they're separating out, a bit like we talked about with the home care, they're separating out, you've covered the accommodation, that's a negotiation with the provider. The basic daily fee, what they're looking at is that's $64 a day, might increase by another $12.55 a day for people who have assets over about $238,000. So there's some thresholds there as well. So potentially the basic daily fee, which is covering all your meals, electricity, heating, cooling, which you're currently contributing $64 a day, could go up by another $12 a day for people with higher levels of assets and income as well. Then, in addition to that, the means tested fee, which people could be paying on average, it could be paying up to on average about $95 a day. That might be increasing up to about $101 a day. But again, it is means tested. So the costs are potentially for the care increasing by about $22 a day, but subject to your financial capacity. And remembering the government's still funding 73% of all the costs in there as well. So they're trying to get something that's a little bit more affordable and sustainable there as well. We have got lifetime caps on there. Some changes are going to simplify the way they've worked up until now as well. And also too, noting these are all changes that come into play from 1 July 2025. They've got in the legislation this no detriment rule, which means if you're in residential care before that date, so before July next year, you won't pay any more than you would have under the current rules. So they're not going to be disadvantaged by these changes going up as well. And we've also got, for people who are really panicking, thinking, but I just don't have capacity, I can't meet any of these expenses, there are more subsidies the less assets you have, and there's also financial hardship. If things really go bad and things just can't work out for you, there are some financial hardship provisions to get extra discounts, extra subsidies to support you through your care needs. So we're trying to have a system that doesn't leave anyone behind. It doesn't matter who you are, you should have access, and there should be some uniform access, with the government still paying for the health costs, but we as individuals contributing towards some of those daily costs of food, electricity, those sorts of things that we do all of our life, no matter where we live.
Louise, just to maybe wrap up the section around fees, could we just talk on service fees or additional service fees? They sort of have different names depending on different facilities, because that seems to be something we're seeing more of. Potentially that's, regional based. In Geelong, we have a lot of facilities, just something that comes up quite frequently in my discussions with clients and families.
Yeah, it is our problem box of fees, isn't it? Because the accommodation one, we can get that and make, the choices we make determine how much we're paying. The basic daily fee, $64 a day, is affordable to everybody. The care costs are means tested, so that means, helps make it affordable as well. But that last box of fees, which is all about additional services, and those additional services might be the provider saying, I can give you better quality, better quality of sheets, bed linen, choices of meals, extra things like a glass of wine or a glass of beer with your meal. So there might be things that are extra, that are little luxuries for you. They might be things that are better quality because you like something a little bit nicer. It may be giving you broader choices, so choice of meals rather than just what they're serving that day. So those sorts of things come at an extra cost, and we're seeing providers packaging them up and making them compulsory. So whether you want to access those or not, they're basically saying, as part of living here, this is the standard of living we provide to everybody, and this is what you will need to pay on a day-to-day basis. And those costs can sometimes be really difficult to fund. We're seeing on average like between about $20 a day and $60 a day extra. And that makes it difficult as well. We're still trying to understand in the new system how that will work. I think it's still going to be in there, because what they talk about is that there will be the opportunity for you to enter into a higher living agreement with your care provider. So providers will still be able to say, what standard? Are we a base level aged care facility, or are we a high-end luxury facility? And again, if you want to live here, this is what our day-to-day fee is. So we think that system is still going to stay, which will mean people will need to shop around and understand. It'll just be a little bit more obvious and entrenched in legislation as well. But it will mean that people will need to shop around, and they will need to work out what the different price points are for the different providers, the same as we do with the room costs. You need to do that more with the day-to-day living costs. And then it's about really working out, how can I afford that? And that's making some decisions to rearrange your finances, your assets. And remember, this is a day when it is absolutely bucketing with rain, spending some of that wealth you've accumulated to not only get quality of care, but quality of lifestyle as much as possible in those later stages as well. We all want that as well.
Beautiful. Now I might launch into a couple of my rapid fire questions, Louise.
Hey.
Again, the responses don't need to be rapid. These are probably, I'd say that they're some of the most common questions or queries that would come our way, and some of them are in the sort of the client's language. Probably the first one you've addressed to some degree, but what do you say to people who say that aged care is unaffordable?
Yeah, I think you need to put it into perspective around as well. It is expensive. So there is no doubt about that, which is why the government, so we as taxpayers are contributing about 76% of the costs of residential care and 95% of home care. Now, most people have got capacity to accumulate a bit more about that as well. The cost of the actual care, we're looking at residential care, as I said, the cost of care is somewhere roughly between about $25,000 a year and about $60,000 a year. That gives you everything. That's all your meals, that's all your electricity, that's all of your entertainment, that's all of the staff that are looking after you. That is everything, apart from your own personal expenditure item and those extras that we just talked about as well. So is it unreasonable to be spending $25,000 to $60,000 a year for all of our living expenses? And noting too that that's means tested, so those who don't have the financial capacity will be paying even less than that as well. So I think it's in that essence, it's a very affordable, it's matched to our individual capacities. And we need to accept that this is not just healthcare hospital, this is where I live, how I live, my day-to-day expenses, and I have a personal obligation right throughout my life to fund that. And if we don't all contribute towards it, we won't have a system at all. And that's
great,
worse.
Such great context and sort of matching to people's means and capacity. I think that gets lost in the noise of the system sometimes. Next question: what are individuals or families' biggest concerns around aged care?
I think they're worried. I mean, they've heard all the bad stories. So there's two things. They've heard all the bad stories. They think it's a terrible place to live. And they also think it's completely unaffordable. So they're the two things as well. So I think in the first instance, so yes, the Royal Commission brought out a lot of terrible stories and the news is always reporting terrible stories, but it doesn't tell you the stories of the 200,000 people who woke up this morning, had a lovely, the staff were really friendly. They had a good day and nothing bad happened. We don't hear those stories. Aged care facilities have changed a lot from what they might have looked like in the past as well. So I think for people who are saying this could be in my future, I'm not sure about it, go and have a look at some. They often have open days and or just volunteer to go and talk to people. People they're lonely in there and they need somebody to just come and read them stories, to rub cream in their hands, to be there. So maybe find a way to go and visit aged care facilities, get to see what they're like, because some of them are very nice resorts. I wouldn't mind living there myself, I think. But so I think overcoming that fear about what it's all about by seeing it and by understanding a little bit as well. The financial side, as again, I think in most instances, if you are making sensible decisions using your finances, getting advice from a licensed financial planner who's really qualified to do this, will take away a lot of that fear as well.
Beautiful. I think that idea of actually spending some time visiting facilities is amazing advice, and it's amazing advice for advisors too. I think the importance of the people that are providing advice is important, that, as advisors in Geelong and in Golden Valley, the Shepparton region, that we've got context and sort of real boots on the ground understanding of what's actually out there for our clients, rather than just looking at the technical components. It's super important for us.
And don't treat them like the enemy as well. I know I hear a lot about it, about these big, bad, terrible aged care providers and that. They're human beings that are doing a job that is so important in our society that we either can't or don't want to do ourselves. So nobody gets up and says, how can I make everybody's life miserable today? They're doing what they can with the resources they've got. Might not meet our expectations every time, but overall, there's some really fabulous staff and some great places. We just need to give them a bit of support and understand it a little bit better too.
Yeah, and continue to build relationships with them. I think it's one of the, we consider the importance of relationship building with all the other professionals that sit around the outside of our clients, and the support and the people, the administrative support that they get from aged care facilities and providers is another relationship that both families, our clients, and also the advisors need to continue to build on. I think that is evident without a doubt. What would you say are what's the most common mistake people make in aged care planning?
Not planning.
Yeah.
It's really that simple. I think if you have done the planning and you have looked at the numbers and done properly, then you can make it work to the best of what your capacities are as well. So definitely not planning. But I would also elaborate on that is also getting advice from people who aren't licensed financial planners. I think that's a mistake because you don't have all the protections and you don't have professional indemnity insurance and external complaints resolution and those sorts of things. So I think you need to plan. You need to seek advice from a licensed financial planner who's qualified in aged care. And I've lost my thought there. What the third one was. Probably edit that bit out.
That's all good.
A bit of an Alzheimer's moment.
Well, I think my next question flows into that. And again, Delta and I could probably do our own sort of personal pitch on the value of advice. But from your perspective, what is the value of engaging an advisor for advice in aged care? Like, what are some of the specific value adds that someone would benefit from in actually seeking advice?
Yeah, so I think if you're seeking advice from a planner, the really key thing is an objective voice in the room that can help you navigate through all the family intricacies and emotions. Being able to put on the table all experience. So objectivity, experience, expertise. That's what an aged care provider brings, which gives you peace of mind and certainty to make the decision you want. Because sometimes it's hard when you're in the middle of the picture to be able to know what are all the options I've got. You might have misconceptions around it. Whether to sell the house or keep the house is a very emotional decision. And so sometimes, a financial planner's role often isn't to say, this is what you should do, but it's to show you, if you choose to go down the pathway of keeping your home, here's what you need to know. These will be the challenges. This is how you make it work. If you choose to sell your home, this is what the challenges will be. Here's what you need to understand. Here's how you make it work. So I think being able to put all of the options very objectively on the table so that they can look at them and make an informed decision. And that can give you peace of mind. It can save you time. It can help avoid family disputes, or at least navigate through those family disputes. I often use an analogy as well of saying, families that try to work out what all the answers for aged care and how to fund it and what to do with the house and what to do with all those assets without getting that advice is like trying to build a jigsaw puzzle without the lid of the box with your brothers and sisters. That is always going to lead to absolute disaster. So the financial planner is going to bring you the lid of the box and help you see exactly what the picture is you're going to build. Save you a lot of stress and give you peace of mind, because you're only going to get one, or if you're me, you might get about 20 different attempts at this. By the time I've got 2 parents, 2 in-laws, 13 aunts and uncles. But for most of us, we're only going to get to do this once, and we can't afford to make that mistake because it's with our most valuable assets, it's our parents.
Mm.
Yeah, it's so true. And that the objective view piece, I think, is and in all aspects of financial planning, I think it's our superpower, the ability to be emotionally removed from a client's situation to the degree that we can actually see what's going on with a sort of a helicopter view. And it doesn't. Most people aren't immediately thinking, when they're talking about aged care, they're not immediately thinking about protecting the estate, decisions around investments, managing cash flow, managing risk. But all of those things have such a pivotal impact, not only now, but forward-looking on the family and the interactions, both financially and on a personal basis. So, again, we're sort of tooting our own horn in that respect. But again, that's what we do. We're here to provide advice at the coalface for our clients with the support of people like yourself, Louise, who can actually give us direction and make the complex simple, which is something we value greatly.
It's true. And it is going to cost some money to get that advice. So I think people need to recognize it is going to cost money to get that advice, but it is a small investment into the future of that family as a whole as well, to make sure you can absolutely get the care that mum or dad need, that they can afford it, that they're still looking at ways of protecting the estate and passing that on. And also, too, what every parent probably hopes is that beyond their passing, their kids are still going to want to get together over Christmas and family events and have a good time. You see in aged care and estate planning, so many families absolutely splinter. So having that objective advice and a bit better understanding may help navigate through that. You guys aren't miracle workers. You're not going to solve every family problem, but it can help. And also too, for an older client, for a lot of your older clients as well, starting those conversations with you well before they need any help as well, gives them a safe place to be thinking about all of that and to think about what they can do with their finances, and to do that before they have to go and have those chats with their bossy kids. And bring in their kids with them, maybe once they've worked with you to get a plan and a sense of what's important to them and what their plans are and what they hope and their wishes, maybe to bring the kids into those conversations as well, because at some point they will need to make the decisions, and having some insights into those early planning conversations, invaluable.
And Louise, I know you've done a lot of work in this space where we talk about the 3 phases of retirement. And I think that's where, we as advisors are really well positioned for our clients sort of foresee, we can sort of see you slowing down a bit. You're not as active as you once were when we had conversations previously. So I'm not sure if you want to talk a little bit about the 3 different phases, because I think it's a really good way for people to sort of forecast and be proactive and plan around what that next phase might involve for them.
Yeah. People often ask me, the question I get asked a lot is, what age should I start planning for aged care? And my answer is all ages, absolutely all ages. Or planners will say, what age client should I start talking? And again, I go, every client, just absolutely everybody. Because when we're thinking about, as a pre-retiree, you're thinking about your retirement, we're all thinking that first fun bucket list years of all the things we're going to do and how exciting that's going to be, the money we're going to need to spend on it. And then we sort of think, I don't know about that end bit. Most people think about the fun things they want to do in their life and plan for death. And so plan for the transition to their families. But what we say is that, I don't know for myself, I don't know what life's going to hold, but I know I'm here now. I've got plans for all the things I want to enjoy. I know at some stage I'm going to pass away, so I've planned for that as well. But we should say that in between that, there will be a period of frailty. So we are all going to experience that. If we're lucky, that will be very short. But it could be weeks, months, could be years for some of us. So why do we want to leave somewhere where we're still alive and still want quality completely to chance? So we need to think about just planning for those active years of your retirement, all the fun things and what we're going to spend. Then we're going to move into what we call the quiet years, where we might say, look, I've done my travel. I just don't want to go out as much, or I'm slowing down, or it's a little bit more difficult for me to get out. And that's probably our home care years in a lot of regards. Things that can help us still get out and still be active and still have quality life, or just, that we're needing a little bit more help around with. And then we move into the frailty period, where we really need a comprehensive package of support services, either still in our home or in that residential environment as well. We need to start thinking about all of those. We need to identify what are the trigger points to say, is now the time we should start shifting and setting up your network, or activating the network that we've set up around you, to deal with this next stage as well. So we need to be thinking about that. And they're hard conversations, and I agree. We often talk with financial planners about being aware of changes in your clients, and being brave enough to raise that conversation. It's not about saying to somebody, you're looking very frail, but it's about saying, are we moving into that next stage? What do we need to do to make sure you're safe and living the best life you can, given the cards we've got at that point in time as well? I think younger clients as well should also be thinking about this. As said, myself, I'm not in retirement yet. I'm thinking about it, but I'm not there. But I still think about aged care a lot. I have conversations with all my friends, my colleagues, my family, people I meet, my age group, all the time about aged care, because we're also thinking about parents. My husband wants to travel and go overseas for months at a time, which I'm happy to do with him, but I keep saying, how do we do that when we've got all of these parents who are refusing to get any support set up around them as well? So thinking about what I can do with my life and my retirement will very much focus around them, because I do not want to leave them vulnerable. You'll see even younger kids, I had a conversation with a 35-year-old nephew, and it's not quite that old, and his wife. They were asking me some questions about financial planning, some things they were thinking about. But honestly, it just emerged into a completely an aged care conversation, because what they were doing, what they were thinking was all hinging around parents as well. And she had a little bit older parents. So I went, hang on a minute, this is an aged care conversation, not a superannuation or a tax conversation that they were thinking. So again, it does creep into all parts of our psyche, whether we're wealth accumulators, pre-retirees, in that early active phase of retirement, moving into our quiet years of retirement, or sitting in the frailty years. We need to think about this, because it's cash flow planning, it's family contingency, it's estate planning, there's tax, there's super, and that's what I said. I started off the podcast saying I loved it because it's financial planning in its pure essence, and it uses all of those skills, and it absolutely does.
It's interesting you're talking about, or from your perspective, from a financial planning perspective, some of the considerations that you have. One of the questions that I ask most of our guests is, what's the best piece of advice, financial, business, personal, that you've received and applied in your own life?
Oh, that's
it could be any of the above.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about it. Probably, I'm not quite sure if it's the best piece of advice. I'd have to say probably the best piece of advice I probably had was when I was in about year 3 at school. And I was always a good student at school. I was a bit of a nerdy student, but I absolutely hated getting up and speaking in front of anybody. And I had this one day, my mum, I was talking to her just a couple of days ago, and she was telling me again this story, and I thought, yeah, probably was that, where I had to get up at school assembly and play an old lady in the play, and I was making myself absolutely ill. I did not want to get up and talk to anybody or stand in front of anyone and talk. And so she said, no, you're going to do it. Just look over their heads, don't look at them, and you'll be fine. I got through it. And I think it sort of set me up as well, because your public speaking and doing that has always made me really nervous. But I found it's such an important thing to be able to talk to people, to do it in a comfortable way. And it probably set up my whole career, because it's what I do all day, every day now, is public speaking and podcasts and training. So I think it was about believing in the skills that you do have that terrify you, and finding a way to be able to get beyond those so that you can, add value to somebody else's day.
Yeah,
Brilliant piece of advice. Yeah,
those foundational experiences in just about everything we do. They do set us up, or positively or negatively. In this instance, it's held you in very good stead. Louise, we've covered a lot of ground today. It's been awesome having you on the podcast. I know we would love to have you back on for a future episode, maybe do a bit more of a technical deep dive into a couple of particular areas. But for now, is there any call to action that you might have to our listeners, our clients, anyone out there thinking about aged care, getting advice? What would you say to them?
I'd say they really should do it. It's something we don't want to think about. It's something we hope never happens to us. But when it does happen, being prepared is so super important. So I would suggest start the conversation with financial planner, start thinking about what's important to you as a person and to your life. What would you be prepared to give up? What are you not? Get in place a plan, talk to your families, and don't be afraid of it, because we will have much better experiences. Aged care is something we should embrace, not resist. So I'd just say start the process now.
Beautiful. Well, Louise, again, on behalf of the team at Burke Brittain and all the advisors around Australia that you currently support with technical expertise, thank you. You're going to be very busy for however many years you've got until you decide to ultimately retire. But good luck with everything with Aged Care Steps and your team. Thanks again for your time on the podcast today. We really appreciate and value what you do.
It's been really good to be here and just to try to get as many people out in the community as we can thinking about it and understanding aged care is a great thing. So thank you for doing this podcast.
That's a pleasure. Thanks again,
Thanks,
Louise.
Okay.
All good. Thanks, Louise.
It's okay. Hopefully it's okay.
It was
I'm sure
brilliant.
it's technical.
I'm sorry we've run over time, but we could probably
Oh,
sit
that's
here
okay.
for the next hour and just keep mulling over so many different aspects of aged care. So thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot to cover, but that's okay. And we'll do another one another time.
Yeah, we'd love to make this a semi-regular thing. It would be great to, again, as I said, it was, with complete honesty that we said that aged care advice is right up at the top of the pops in terms of requests we get at the moment. So I think the more we can continue to get the message out there amongst our existing clients, even though we've got great relationships with them all, sometimes having another voice, a third party that's reinforcing what we've already spoken to them about can be super valuable. So
you could probably do another one about just putting some real numbers and just sticking to one part of it, just doing home care and going, okay, here's an example, this is what it would cost, and also do you need to move now or afterwards as well. So we sort of didn't get into any of those bits, but
well, it's a good fallback episode, one that people can refer back to, understand a little bit about your background and a broad overview of aged care, and let's deep dive on one particular topic in the future. But thanks again, Louise. We really do appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Day and weekend. Okay,
Thanks,
bye.
Louise.
Cheers.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you're keen to understand more about how financial advice could benefit you, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Burke Brittain FP, or Google Burke Brittain Financial Partners. Check out our client reviews, testimonials, and make a time to meet one of our certified financial planners by clicking Book Now on our website. Thanks for listening.
Any information contained in this podcast is of a general nature only. No account was taken as to the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. Therefore, before making any decision, listeners should consider the appropriateness of any information with regard to their particular objective, financial situation, needs, and seek independent advice from a licensed professional specific to their circumstances.
All right, hit it.
That translates to don't be a moron and act on what some random person says on a podcast. Take personal responsibility, do your homework, ask questions, and speak to an actual human that knows what they're talking about before you do anything. PB Financial Solutions Proprietary Limited, trading as Burke Brittain Financial Partners, are authorised representatives of AMP Financial Planning Limited, AFS, licence number 232706.